So, this is Crash Course in Healing and Sexual Violence, a framework for healing. And this is one of our mini episodes to really start to dive into what is sexual violence, what's our relationship with healing, and what is healing centered advocacy. But first, we're going to have to define what sexual violence is. We define sexual violence as any unwanted sexual conduct that happens without a person's consent. This includes both contact and non contact behaviors. We define contact sexual violence as any sexual act that includes physical contact with someone's body. This can be with a person's body or with another object. Non contact violence, however, is things that don't include contact with someone's body. So this can include words we say, gestures, or any actions that we might take digitally or virtually online. It's important to recognize that both contact and non contact behaviors are still violent, harmful, and negatively impact survivors' lives. We also specifically use the term sexual violence because it covers a range of actions and behaviors, and it's not limited to legal definitions. While the law might criminalize some behaviors, we know that just because something isn't illegal doesn't mean it isn't harmful or violent. We also have to explain how this affects who is perceived to be vulnerable or targeted for sexual violence. So, people who are perceived to be vulnerable or targeted for sexual violence are perceived to fall into one or more of these categories. They are believed to be highly accessible, highly vulnerable, and have low levels of credibility. Now, when we're thinking about who in our society might fall into these categories, who might be considered highly accessible, highly vulnerable, and not very creditable, these are people who might use substances, and this can include prescribed substances like medication, those who are unsheltered or housing insecure, and some people might refer to these people as homeless, those who are already sexually active, immigrants, those who are in foster care, those who are detained or institutionalized, those with criminal or school records, people who are of a lower socioeconomic status, or some people might say poor, and people with disabilities. And when we compare these groups, we can also see that they may be referred to in our work as underserved populations. Underserved populations often experience disparities or negative impacts in our society when compared to other populations. This lack of ability to get what they need is related to power, which is also at the root of sexual violence. Now, how is sexual violence related to power? The example on the slide is a simplified demonstration of what the power imbalance in sexual violence is like. When sexual violence happens, the harm doer has more power in the survivor in that moment, and they use sexual violence as a tool to exercise that power. The harm doer, or some might say perpetrator, or the person causing harm, their power outweighs the power of survivors in the moment. Sometimes I might say they overpowered the survivor. Now, this power can be a physical advantage, like strength used to restrain someone or to touch someone during sexual assault. But it can also be a person's status or their authority or their reputation that they use to coerce someone or groom individuals in order to do sexual harm. Whether it involves physical contact or not, harm doers are using, and specifically misusing, their power to use sexual violence and exploit that survivor and the people around them. Now, these positions are not permanent because we know some people who have caused and experienced sexual violence. But it does explain the relationship and how power exists between survivors and the harm doers in that moment. I also want to clarify that it is not wrong to have power. We each have power to make decisions and choices for ourselves, which is good. The issue lies in how the power is used or misused. When power is used to take away someone's consent or to manipulate and force someone into sexual activity, that's sexual violence. And when we're thinking about where sexual violence happens and how it happens, it's important for us to also realize that sexual violence does happen in rural communities. Now, inside of the things on the slide, sexual violence happens in rural communities at higher rates that are ever disclosed, and it's important for us to know and believe that so we can combat this misinformation with facts that we know. We also know that many prisons and jails are in rural communities, and people who've experienced sexual violence and abuse do end up incarcerated or will experience sexual violence while in prison. And that's really important for us to know because these survivors are in our communities, even though they are often removed from our general population. It's also important for us to know that sexual violence happens in rural communities, even if that's not the perception in that rural community. Now, I know a lot of rural communities are very tight knit, and this can be very good and very helpful because when things happen, everyone in the community hunkers down, they feel responsible, and they support each other to make sure that everyone has what they need and is taken care of. But on the other side, when something like sexual violence happens, often people know both the person who experienced the sexual violence and the person that did the sexual violence. And they know their grandmothers, their coaches, and so on and so forth. And so for rural communities, it can feel really sticky and nuanced for people to navigate these situations. People often feel like they have to choose sides of who to support, right? Or to support the survivor or the person that caused harm, which drives disconnection and negatively impacts the community. Also, because these communities are so tight knit, sometimes it's hard to balance the need for privacy and confidentiality and not to make someone keep something a secret or feel like they can't share what happened to them without consequences. This may be a place for our advocacy efforts and may be part of some of the safety planning we do with survivors. And in part because of this attitude, but also because of how resources are allotted to rural communities, we know that there's large gaps in rural sexual violence services. These services that do exist are often less funded, the programs are understaffed, and the staff are overworked and underpaid, and the programs are far from other resources that people might need, and overall, there's just fewer options for people to choose from. If the survivor doesn't want to call the helpline because they know that their brother's wife is going to be working tonight, what other option do they have? And that's if there are any resources in their community at all. Lastly, when people do want to address sexual violence in their communities, a lot of the funding, resources, attention, and most importantly, the solutions don't center the needs or listen to the stories and challenges, but also consider the joys and successes that come from rural communities. Even though, like we talked about, sexual violence does happen in rural communities. So, some of the advocacy that you might be providing to sexual violence survivors could be through your outreach efforts by just letting them know that they qualify and that resources are available. So, all that is to say, rural communities are impacted by sexual violence and they should be at the center and leading the way. We're talking about how to respond to it. We firmly believe that those who are closest to the problem are closest to the solution. So now let's focus on the specific means for sexual violence advocacy. So, when we talk about the relationships between domestic violence survivors and sexual violence survivors, there are some overlaps, but there are also some key differences. For those who are experiencing domestic violence, the relationship to the person that harmed them is going to be a family member or a former or intimate partner. Now, for those who experience sexual violence, that may not be the case. Their relationship could be to anyone. So it could be a former or current romantic partner, it could be a relative, but it could also be a coach, their boss, a coworker. If they are incarcerated, it could be a correctional officer. It could be someone that they go to church with, right? Someone they know kind of well, but not really, right? An acquaintance. The relationship could be anyone. So it's important to know that when we're talking about the relationships, domestic violence is dependent on the relationship between the survivor and the person that harmed them. Sexual violence is dependent on the actions, the behavior, and the conduct. Even if there was no prior relationship at all, there might still be sexual violence. Now, let's focus on the needs, right? So, for over the years, the Resource Sharing Project has done research directly with survivors and asked them what they need most for their healing. And consistently, these are the three most identified needs that came directly from survivors. They want to be believed, have access to consistent emotional support, and be able to achieve healing and safety. And these needs are very different from the ones that come up for domestic violence survivors. A lot of these needs are more standardly available. They're more formulaic, right? So they can go somewhere to receive shelter, to receive an order of protection or protective orders. There is a clear criminal justice response. And these things are more tangible and they revolve around crisis and immediate physical safety. And that's different for sexual violence survivors. So if the relationships are different and the needs are different for domestic violence survivors, then the advocacy that we provide has to be different too. And that includes the services that are available to sexual violence survivors, how we do advocacy, and also how our programs are structured. So now let's focus in a little bit more on healing. What is it? And why are we spending and doing a whole mini episode about healing and healing centered advocacy? We define healing as caring for the many parts of oneself that have been interrupted by trauma: the physical, emotional, social, mental, spiritual, and more. One of the main reasons why we focus on healing services for sexual violence advocacy is because it's a direct response to survivors' needs. And it's important for us to know and to say on this webinar that while we can encourage healing and have healing centered services, that is something that only survivors can determine for themselves. Healing has to be self motivated, self identified, and self paced. And what does that mean when we say we need to provide healing centered advocacy? We mean that we have to have advocacy that looks at healing holistically in survivors' lives. So, this is a chart called the areas of hurt and healing. And we use this to demonstrate that survivors have areas in their life where they hurt. And typically, sexual violence services have traditionally focused on the body and basic needs. How can we get survivors what they need to be physically safe and to make sure they have their basic needs taken care of? But if we really want to serve sexual violence survivors, we have to focus on all of the different areas. For a lot of sexual violence survivors, the place where they feel the most unsafe is their own bodies and within their bodies, right? So, not just taking care of these physical things that will become reoccurring, but these things that allow them to navigate life. Related to these areas, survivors also have places, and so these areas help us explore where in survivors' lives they have been hurt or experienced trauma, right? And so it goes beyond just basic needs and relation and basic needs and bodies, but also there's going to be effects through their sexuality, their spirituality, their mind, their culture, and in their relationships. We also know that in these areas are places where survivors can find joy and also be places where they can find healing as well. So, for example, the survivor might have been hurt and when they experience it, they might have had an adverse effect on their relationships. But when they start to heal, They might rely on their spirituality or relationship with their faith communities to start to feel better about their experience with sexual violence. It's also important to note that what happens in one area will have an effect on another area, and all of the different areas are related. So, when we think about healing and providing healing services, we have to think about how we can support survivors in each of these areas. What resources are we going to need? What services do we need to offer? What funding do we need to provide these services and to sustain our staff? How do we need to think about support for sexual violence survivors differently, as well as prevention and other types of intervention for sexual violence? When we're exploring different types of intervention, this also includes prevention of sexual violence, but also intervention in the lives of survivors' families, their communities, and for those who are causing sexual harm. If you are interested in a link or access to the Areas of Hurt and Healing worksheet, that will be available on the Resource Sharing Project website. And we really want to emphasize the importance of healing centered advocacy because of the realities that sexual violence survivors deal with. We know that the vast majority of sexual violence survivors do not receive what they want or need after disclosing sexual violence. Most sexual violence survivors will not report to law enforcement. According to RAIN, out of 1,000 survivors, only 50 will lead to an arrest. Out of 1,000 survivors, only 50 will lead to an arrest. 28 will 28 of those from those arrests will lead to a felony conviction, and only 25 perpetrators are going to be sentenced to incarceration. So that is 0.025% of people who will be held accountable by the criminal legal system. And when survivors do interact with the criminal legal system, it is not the healing and helpful response that they might have wanted or chose had they known what the outcome would be. When survivors do interact, they find that the system doesn't meet their needs or focus on a very narrow set. So, for example, when a survivor is interacting with a prosecutor, they might ask the survivor what they want to do in a case. But ultimately, it is the prosecutor who decides how to move a case forward, and that may consider what a survivor says, but it does not have to align with what the survivor may want or need to happen in a case. Also, the criminal legal system might take away their ability to choose what's best for them and how they want to proceed in their lives, and it might cause them further harm. So, for example, a survivor might go through the criminal legal process. They may testify, they may have people may write victim witness statements, they may meet with the prosecutor several times, do all the things quote unquote right, and there still may not be a felony conviction or a conviction at all in the case of sexual violence. So that might cause more harm to the survivor because they might say, after all this time and all the effort I spent and having to relive my trauma, I still did not get the justice that I wanted. So again, when our advocacy, and if our advocacy is just about how we can provide criminal legal response to sexual violence, we are going to not provide a holistic response to sexual violence survivors in our communities. If we're doing this, we're going to miss the survivors who don't report. And remember, only 25% of survivors do report, between 20 and 25% of survivors do report to law enforcement. We will have a very narrow scope of services, and we are not going to be able to help and support secondary survivors or community members who are not directly impacted by sexual violence. But instead, when we focus on healing center services, we can meet survivors exactly where they are in their healing. We can support them no matter when the sexual violence happened, whether that was 2 days ago, a week ago, a year ago, or decades past. We can still be able to provide them that support. We can also support them whether or not they have wanted to participate in systems or been a part of systems, right? And that could be someone who is classified as quote unquote a victim or someone is classified as quote unquote um, a criminal, right? Or the offender in a case. And that's important because prior experiences with criminal legal systems can deter survivors from wanting to report or wanting to seek out services. Healing Center advocacy also allows us to support survivors across the lifespan. So that's children, youth, adults, and older adults, but also we can support survivors how and when they grow and change with new experiences in their lives. So for example, a lot of survivors experience additional trauma after becoming pregnant, or they experience additional trauma while navigating getting older and having people make decisions for them once their mental capacity is declining. All of these things are going to look different at different ages, at different stages and areas in survivors' lives. So we have to have supports ready for them when they need them. And Healing Center advocacy does not say you only have to focus on one person in our response to intervention. If we really want to provide healing, and remember, one of the areas of healing was in relationships, that means we have to focus on individuals, their partners, their loved ones, and their larger communities. And when we say meet survivors where they are, we mean we want this is advocacy that can address each sphere in their lives. So what's going on with them spiritually, what's going on with their sexual health, what's going on in their relationships, right? What's going on with their mental health. It also allows us to use those principles of trauma informed care. When we're considering how someone's trauma impacts every area of their life, then we are doing healing centered advocacy and trauma informed advocacy. It also asks us to consider the holistic needs, again, not just of the survivor, but also those who support them. It can also benefit survivors who want to interact with the systems. So if the survivor says, I still want to do XYZ within the criminal legal system, that's okay. Healing Center advocacy allows for them space to do that and to receive other types of support that they might need. It's also beneficial to the mental health of advocates. So sometimes when people are doing sexual violence advocacy, advocates might say, I don't feel like I'm doing anything. All I did was listen, or all I wasn't able to give them anything. And when we recognize that healing centered advocacy is listening, is staying with someone and hearing what they have to say, is helping someone figure out the choices that they have to make, is really being able to provide quality emotional support that can help us shift our own ideas of what successful advocacy is and shift the way that we think about providing good advocacy. And again, if we want to truly meet the needs of sexual violence survivors, we have to be able to center those needs in the services that we provide. So there are some standard services that even RSP says sexual violence programs should provide. However, the services that your organization should provide have to be responsive to the needs of the specific survivors in your community. And those services or the types of support that you offer may seem unrelated to the survivor on the surface. And the only way we will discover what those needs are is by being in contact with survivors, listening to survivors, and then building services off of those responses. And if we're doing healing center advocacy that supports the needs of sexual violence survivors, then the role of the advocate needs to center healing as well. Essentially, the role of the sexual violence advocate is to promote healing in the lives of survivors that enables them to meet their needs and for them eventually to thrive. And we can do this through four different strategies: hope, worth, security, and connection. But what are some practical ways to do that as an advocate? How can I help and do healing center advocacy in my everyday practices? Well, we'll talk about this more in some of our future webinars. But by promoting those four frames or four strategies for healing centered advocacy, hope, worth, security, connection, and then doing or practicing these five skills: empathetic and active listening, choice points, safety planning, grounding, and boundary setting, we will be able to provide healing centered services. That is the end of this mini episode. If you have any needs around training, technical senses, or you have some resources that you would like, please feel free to reach out to me at lachey@iowacasa.org. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.